You're listening to Inside iOS Dev, episode number 7. 12 libraries to skyrocket your iOS development. You're listening to Inside iOS Dev, a show about real-world iOS development, here with your hosts, Andrew Rohn
and Alex Bush.
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the top libraries you can use to skyrocket your iOS development.
Right, and the first library on our list is IGListKit. It's an Instagram library, open sourced.
This is I think this is kind of a big deal in the community. I saw that it was posted a lot of places. Essentially, I have not used it personally. I don't believe you have either.
We when we were researching on our on a library for
improving
UI,
the scroll performance of our UI.
Yes, that's when we stumbled upon it, and it was one of the candidates, but we decided not to go with it though.
Right, and the main reason that is because IGListKit is not a library for writing layout, writing UI.
Right.
Basically, what it is it's a way of how you architect your data source and your collection view. It's essentially helping to avoid the problem of massive view controllers.
And specifically in collection view controllers.
Yes, and collection view controllers.
Right. So it helps you organize, as you said, your data structure, data sources, and all of that. That feeds in specifically into your collection views. And the use case would be if you implement something like what Instagram has, right? A feed of photos or things similar to that, with most of the content being
fairly static.
Yeah.
And if you look in Instagram's app, their feed is not very complicated, actually. And the only dynamic thing, as far as we just checked, was that the comments, because the text is variable, but everything else is pretty static. So it's really not that complicated. So I think for them, UI and like scroll performance was a little less important. It was more of this
sanity in code.
Sanity in code organization. The other thing that I also think is they also wanted it to make it like flexible. So if you have different items in your data source, I think they have like this adapter basically, and then you just like feed the items into the adapter, and then the adapter will just like take care of the different items in your data source. So in that way, it's more flexible. It can handle different things.
Next one on our list is Realm. Realm is a replacement or alternative rather to Core Data.
Right.
And it's I guess not a framework, a library for implementing database solution in your iPhone applications, local database.
Right.
And it's similar to Core Data in a sense of how it's organized, and it's not implementing active record pattern or something like that. It's also same way as Core Data. It's objects that represent records in your database, but it's faster, it's easier to use, comparing to Core Data. Less problems with it, and it's kind of talk of the town of latest year and a half, maybe even more. And it's improving. There are two sides to it. One is the client-side implementation, which is free and open. I guess not open source, but open for free use for us, for developers. That will give you the local database and all of those classes to access it, read and write to it, and so on. And there is another paid component to it, which is a cloud solution that they recently released that helps you sync that local data with the backend, with their backend thing. Kind of like Parse in a way, or Firebase, right? I guess Parse is discontinued. A great solution for your database implementation.
So really quick, I'm wondering, when would I use this over Core Data or just using like a SQL database directly?
Specific, like SQL on iOS specifically is kind of hard to use because there are no good tools for it, and support from iOS system is not there to, like, they kind of don't want you to do that. That's why they built core data.
Right.
But Realm you will use, I mean, if it's easier to use than core data and more convenient, and specifically where it shines when you have a lot of reads and writes fast. Like, roughly speaking, if you build a chat application and you want to have your cache backup client side locally in a database, that thing would be way better than core data, because you need to do fast reads and writes. It's reactive, right, to the user's typing and so on and so on. So yeah. The next one on our list is SwiftyJSON. That library is a go-to library for parsing JSON in Swift, and it's essentially just like Mantle used to be a go-to solution for that, using Objective-C to have, when you have your dictionary of JSON data and you want to map it into your local domain model objects. With Objective-C you would use Mantle, and these days with Swift you would use SwiftyJSON. That seems to be the go-to solution.
Next up, we have AsyncDisplayKit. Me and Alex are very fond of AsyncDisplayKit.
It's an amazing framework.
It's amazing. We used it in the Wanilo app and we loved it so much. It's just recently renamed Texture.
Pinterest's kind of taken over a little.
Pinterest kind of, I guess, is kind of taking up the torch on that. It was started by Facebook?
Right.
So yeah, basically what AsyncDisplayKit does is it helps improve the scroll performance of things like collection views and table views. And that's precisely the problem we had in the Wanilo application. We had a news feed that was a table view that had this dynamic cells, and so that was done in auto layout, and auto layout was just not fast enough. I believe the algorithm for it is polynomial time. Right.
And the dynamic data in our case would be various text sizes, right?
Right. So yeah, the comment, there was a couple comment fields in there, so those might differ in size.
And there was a description of the post, which also could vary, right?
Right. And also if there was, you could post products underneath, kind of your main picture. So basically we had these different elements that could appear or disappear or change in
each cell
in size. So we did some research. We found Texture, ASDK, and we loved it. It made our app go from scrolling, so you scroll as fast as you can, kind of do your finger as fast as you can, and try to make ASDK stutter, and it would keep up with you. Whereas before, with auto layout, it couldn't. It would drop down to like 15 frames per second.
Right.
And now it just sings at 60 FPS. It's beautiful.
Yeah, buttery smooth. They promised it and they delivered. It was amazing.
And it was very easy to set up.
Yeah, surprisingly. Well, our estimation was 4 weeks to rebuild the whole feed experience, but ended up being a couple of weeks only.
It was so fast.
Yeah. And the way it works is it calculates your UI ahead of time in the background, your frames for your UI, upcoming UI as you scroll.
Right.
That's how it gets that blazingly fast.
Yeah, and because of that, you can't use auto layout because auto layout's on the main thread.
Right.
But it's fear not. Even though you don't get to use auto layout, I like auto layout. It's declarative, which I like. You do have this declarative Flexbox system, basically,
which I love. Reminds me of Android a little, but in the good parts of it,
where you just kind of declaratively say how you want your views to be set up, and then as you're scrolling, ASDK or Texture will look ahead further than your regular table view might, and start coming up with those frames, and so that's why it's able to do it.
Right.
Scroll so quickly.
And another good thing about it is that you don't have to go. Don't think that you have to go all in on that and only use ASDK or Texture. I guess if you chose it, you could only pick it for one part of your application, specifically where it shines. For us, it was dynamically sized feed of items.
Right.
But the rest of your app could just still continue using auto layout or frames. The next one up is DZNEmptyDataSet.
Yeah, DZNEmptyDataSet.
DZN, yeah.
I guess this is the one I chose just because I don't know why. It's kind of even not really a big deal. Just basically, let's say you have a feed, but for some reason the feed can be populated. Maybe there's not enough data or there's no network connection or something like that. So you don't have data to populate this feed. Well, then if you don't set up like kind of this empty set pattern, as they call it, then the user can just be looking at some empty scroll view,
Right.
Because there's nothing to display. There's no data to populate that table view with, right?
And it looks ugly, and users might think something's broken because there is no UI indication that, well, there is no data, right?
Right. So basically, with this, you can basically it was like you just set up. It's a protocol,
Right.
right? And so
I think it's a category on top of UI table view, but it's
UI table view and
implemented
yeah. So it's a category in UI table view, UI collection view, probably in the UI scroll view
Right.
super class then. But then you put that on one of your classes, and then basically what you can do is it'll have like an image in one of the methods that conforms to the protocol. It'll return an image, and so in there you can return some image. And then you might have there's like a title text, and from there you can return the title text and then a description. So for example, the image could be a sad cat, and then below the title text it could say, sorry, nothing here, and then the description could be, looks like your network is not connected or something like that. And so really actually I think it's actually not the most amazing thing, but it's nice that you have just like the standardized way of doing it, and then it's enforcing you to just not forget to implement the empty dataset pattern. So next up we have Hero. Hero is basically a library for implementing UI view controller transitions. I personally think this is really cool because I had to at one point, I didn't actually end up fully implementing the view controller transition, but I did kind of go through the steps and was about to, and the API is a little cumbersome.
Right.
So I think this would be very nice to use for if you're going to do UI view controller custom transitions. Use this Hero transition library.
So the next one is charts. That library helps you implement charts, right? And it's actually a fairly complex task to do and cumbersome. You have to think about a lot of stuff and maybe even draw manually, actually.
By charts, you mean like bar charts and pie?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
line graphs, things like that.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Which you would honestly rarely do on iOS, but from time to time, some dashboards of some kind. Like if you're implementing an application that actually connects to your account for that analyzes stuff, right? That then you would need to represent data that way. And probably a good idea at the end of the day is actually build it yourself and customize it and so on. But especially if you're building an MVP, right, and you need to move quick and you don't know if that is actually, that important, such an important part of your app, then use that library. It's great that these days we actually have something like that. Back in the day, it was hard to do. It was like 2 options maybe with Objective-C. So yeah, chart. The next one up is MGSwipeTableCell. So this library helps you implement complex swipe interactions with table view cells, and specifically the kind of interaction that Mailbox app introduced. That it's already discontinued, but they were the first to kind of implement that very well and make it widespread.
So that's the swipe you're talking about, is the swipe when you kind of, let's say on the Mail app, when you swipe to the left, it brings up like the different options where you can archive it, mark it as read, flag it.
Right, but that would be the default stuff.
Right.
But on top of that, the interaction is more complex. If you only swipe, like you flick a little, then it gives you those options. But if you hold your finger on the cell and swipe all the way from the right to left, it's going to show you like a different action, let's say archive or something.
Right.
And same could be from the right, left hand side to right, swiping to the right side. So you would swipe a little, like 1/4 the way, right? You would see one action, you swipe a little bit more, like another quarter, and you'll see another action, and so on.
Yeah, this is really cool. This is one of those things that you would think that would be natively supported by Apple, and it's not for some strange reason. So this is, if you want to have that behavior, use this.
Yeah. The next one up is RxSwift. This library is one of the functional reactive programming libraries. It's an implementation of reactive extensions, which is Microsoft. Yes, guys, Microsoft technology, but it's a widespread.
How dare you?
It's a really good one, though. They open sourced it. There are various implementations of Rx in different languages, and Swift is one of them now. And essentially, there's a lot to talk about there, but essentially what it lets you do, it unifies data flow and allows you to I guess represent your data as a stream of events, and that helps you unify and combine things because it's functional and you can use all the higher order functions such as map, filter, and so on. But anyway, it's a very handy thing for various things such as asynchronous development, observations, and lots of other things. So if you ever use Reactive Coca, please switch to that. This is way better. And if you never used functional reactive programming, that's also that's a go-to thing.
So if, just really quick, let's say I don't know what functional reactive programming is. I've heard a little bit about it. Can you give me like a concrete example of like why I would want to use this?
That helps you reduce state in your application, and state is a source of a lot of problems for us developers implementing things, and helps you make it more functional, right? In that sense, and the less state you have, the less bugs you have.
Okay.
And think one example could be a simple one. Think of when user types in a text field.
Okay.
That input from the user is a stream of data. Every character typed in is yet another event that happened in the system. So you can react to it and maybe have something displayed based on what they typed.
So let's say they're entering the email and they put in a character that's not valid, then it could show a...
It could just
react right away and say, hey, this is an invalid email format.
Or if it's valid, it could enable button to go next.
The submit button or something.
Yeah. The next one is PromiseKit. PromiseKit is essentially, it's a library that helps you wrap and abstract out asynchronous operations specifically. And it's a kind of nice abstraction on top of GCD and NS operations. It's way easier to use it, and there are various implementations of that in different languages and frameworks. So you might be already familiar with that, coming, let's say, from JavaScript, or maybe even C# and those other frameworks and languages.
Right.
But at the end of the day, guys, go with RxSwift. It does that and even more.
Are you? I feel like you might not be being fair to PromiseKit, or you do have a favoritism towards RxSwift.
I am biased, yes. It just, I guess, it's easier to understand. Don't get me wrong. Like RxSwift is hard to wrap your head around at first, and PromiseKit is way easier. And it might be a good entry point for like simplifying your asynchronous programming in your iOS app. But later down the road, you probably would want to move to something like RxSwift.
Okay, okay, interesting. And I think this could potentially be another episode in itself to discuss that.
Definitely, yeah.
The next library we have here is GDPerformanceView. This is kind of a simple one, basically, but it's good for debugging purposes. Essentially what it does is it shows a kind of this, in your status bar at the very top, it'll show your frames per second, your CPU usage, what else? The iOS and app version at the very top there. So that's nice to have when you're debugging your application, just to be able to look at those right away.
Yeah, pretty handy stats.
Yep.
The next one is Alamofire. That's a very, very famous library that is basically AF networking, but a Swift version of that, by the same guys. And that library helps you. Is essentially, you could implement your networking, HTTP networking, for example, with an SURL session and everything that Apple provides you, but at the end of the day, it's very cumbersome and it's not easy to use, actually, right? There are a lot of little things that you need to remember, not straightforward, hard to abstract. So that library actually abstracts all of it out, and it's very, very well done, and community been using it for years. So it's polished and well maintained.
This is probably one of the most, if not the most used libraries.
I would think so, yeah.
If you include also its predecessor,
AF networking.
AF networking. I mean, this is kind of standard in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
So what it gives you in your networking implementation gives you, there are, roughly speaking, 3 tasks to do there. One is do the actual HTTP networking to get or send your JSON data or XML, whatever you use. And then there are 2 other parts. Is after you get that raw JSON data, you need to map it into NS dictionaries or similar, more or less abstract objects in Swift. And then after that, you map those into your domain model objects. So what Alamofire helps you with is the HTTP networking part and serialization part, where you map raw JSON into NS dictionary objects.
Right.
So like those 2 pieces. Everything else, the rest is up to you, and there are different libraries to help with it.
So after that, can I then use the SwiftyJSON that we described earlier to then map to my objects, my model objects?
Exactly. Yeah, that would be the use case for that.
Cool. All right, guys, that's everything for the episode today. Thank you very much for listening. If you like this, please rate, review, subscribe.
And you can reach us at Twitter. It's at InsideIOSDev. If you have any questions, you want to just say hi.
Questions, feedbacks, anything, suggestions, anything. We would love to hear from you.
All right. Bye.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.